We're going to continue our series on 5 reptiles from each continent that make good pets. And per someone's request, we're going to do North America next. And starting this off, and while I could do, a little bit of a cop out and talk about corn snakes and things like that, that I've did with Europe and I did with Australia and that I will be doing with Africa, but I wanted to do a little bit different for the rest of the countries. So we're not going to talk about corn snakes because, that's easy peasy. But this one, I'm going to talk about a really cool group of snakes, specifically this guy here, although he is being absolutely silly right now, and that is pine snakes. So pine snakes are a species of very heavy-bodied colubrid found in North America. And while there's a couple other ones, like a couple different types of Mexican pine snakes, we're really talking about one species that is generally referred to as the pine snake, and that is Pituophis melanoleucus. So Pituophis, that's the genus. It's with the bulls and the gophers and the pines. Melanoleucus is the actual species, and in this species there are 3 specific subspecies, and I'm mostly going to be talking about this guy, the northern, which actually is his namesake, which is Pituophis melanoleucus. And I did a whole species spotlight on these guys, and I plan to do ones for the other 2 as well. The other 2 are the black pine and the southern or Florida pine, usually southern. These guys basically occupy most of the southeastern United States, with a couple pockets up in New Jersey, like this guy. Apache here is a Ocean County, New Jersey locality. And basically other than a few, like the little bit in New Jersey, essentially from Virginia all the way down south into Florida, with the differing ones. These guys kind of end in like the Carolinas and Tennessee, Kentucky area. The black pines are kind of in like the real, like the Bible Belt of the South, in Tennessee, in Georgia, Alabama, not Tennessee, in Georgia, Alabama, parts of Louisiana. And then the southern pine will occupy the southern part of the entire range down into Florida. And they do naturally intergrade at the overlap. Intergrade is when they naturally overlap and will hybridize each other, essentially, where you'll get like a black southern cross, and that happens quite often in the wild, and it does kind of sometimes happen in captivity as well. So out of those 3 ones, other than individual states, they can be threatened. The black pine is itself actually endangered per U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So if you have a black pine snake, like myself, you have to either get them from inside of your state or acquire an interstate travel or commerce permit and contact with your breeder who can do stuff about that. But these guys are really cool. Like I said before, they're a very heavy-bodied, muscular snake. You can tell that even though, so Apache here, he's probably about 4-ish feet long, and they do average 4 to 6 feet, northerns being the largest, the blacks in the middle, and then the southerns the smallest. They're not actually constrictors like the boas, the pythons, or even like the corn and rat snakes. These guys mostly just kind of overpower their prey. And yeah, they will do a little bit of wrapping and stuff, but they don't actually kill by constriction like a lot of the other ones. They're just really big and powerful little animals. These guys are really cool. They are really an animal that's really good about specific localities, to the point where they're being found in individual counties, and especially with like the black pines, because you need to know where they're coming from because they are endangered, and we want to try to keep their bloodlines diverse. The northerns, they have quite a bit of diversity, both in localities and their arthomorphs, like specifically the northerns. There are these really nice white ones. There are ones where they're more red. There are the Kentucky northern pines where they're almost like a bumblebee, where they're yellow with black. The black pines obviously are the black, although there is a little bit of pied in there. The southern pines have a wide variety of morphs. 3 different types: the leucistic, patternless, white-sided, darks, lights. It's all over the place. They're really, really cool, as well as all the individual localities around them. These guys are awesome. They're really, really cool. They're fairly hardy and easy to take care of. Just give them plenty of space because they will utilize that. And however, if you do decide to get one as a captive or as a pet, these guys grow fast. As far as snakes go, they have very rapid and fast metabolisms, so you can actually feed them quite more often than you normally would even other colubrid snakes that process food even faster than boas and pythons. As well as they have very good prey responses and very defensive as babies. And all the Pituophis, bulls, gophers, and pines have that modified epiglottis, which gives them that crazy strong hiss, that sound. And so if you're deciding to get one of these things and you're not quite used to that, it's going to take a little bit of patience and practice trying to deal with a lot more frequent feedings and handlings to get them used to people as they get older. But generally, once they get to this size or larger, they're usually pretty docile. And this is really more anecdotal, but I've kind of noted a little bit. The northerns are usually the most calm. And then it kind of, like, it seems like the further south you go with the different subspecies, which includes the Louisiana pine snakes, the entirely different species, it seems a little bit more cantankerous the further south you get in the range down to the Mexican pines too. But anyway, these guys are really cool and just a really interesting and fascinating species of snake that I think gets overlooked. This next one might get me into a little bit of trouble because there's a lot of dispute about this a little bit. So this next one is the Boa Sigma, or the Mexican boas. So the reason why I say this might get me into trouble, as it has in some of my other videos, basically the boa constrictors that we all think of were divided into 3 distinct species: constrictor, imperator, and sigma. The sigma boas are the ones that essentially are the dwarf type, although they also call a lot of the Central American ones that stay a little smaller also dwarves. But basically, from specific areas like the Sky Island and the Tarahuma Mountains, those are the Boa Sigma, which basically means that they divided them into distinct species because enough DNA-wise and enough physicality-wise, they were differed enough even from the very varied amount of the imperators. So this is why I say this might get me into a little bit of trouble, because some people will argue that they are not in fact that, but they are generally accepted in the scientific and biological community as being a separate species. So with that being said, these guys are found on kind of the northern part of Mexico on the Pacific side. So if you're going down, think a little bit further south of Baja, California, with the little peninsula, and then there's where they're usually at. These guys occupy a really cool area. Obviously, they call them Tarahuma Mountains because that's where they're found, but these are kind of very steep mountains that are found in what is generally the more arid cacti Sonoran desert climate of northern Mexico. But because of the ocean currents that come off the Pacific meeting those islands, it makes this really cool microclimate where these more tropical type animals are found. Now, as far as care as these guys go, it's very similar to how you would take care of any of the other imperators or constrictors. Obviously, they can probably take a little bit less humidity because they do come from areas with a little bit ambient less, but they still need that high because, like I said, microclimates. That's very important that we remember that. They do stay a lot smaller. They usually only range to about 4, maybe 4.5 feet long of a large female. The biggest thing about these guys is, while they're not necessarily like a lot of the Central Americans have a reputation for being kind of cantankerous, it's mostly about where you're finding them. And this is because when you have these animals that are from very geographically isolated areas, the ones that we get into captivity to hopefully contribute to captive breeding programs to take the ease off of wild collecting, we don't have a whole lot of them. And so you have a lot of animals that, unless are documented and their lineage traced, you have ones that are crossed out. So if you ever come across an animal that has like a leopard IMG hypo and they call it a Sigma boa, it's not. So the biggest thing to remember about these guys are make sure that you know who you're getting them from and ask a little bit of questions about them, which honestly a lot of people should do regardless of what type of snake you get. You should always be talking to your breeder about their animals, but just that, it's a little bit more of a, PSA for your consideration kind of a thing. And again, I love all sorts of the red tail boas. I have all of them, although I don't have any Sigmas, but one day it'd be really cool to get those. But I think they're really, really cool types of snakes. At this point, it's pretty well established that my bias is 100% snakes, but I do love all reptiles. And so this next one is going to be my essentially token lizard of the video. But in all honesty, these guys do make really good pets. And at some point, I do want to get a few of these. And these are the banded geckos. Banded geckos are really cool, and they are found essentially from southwestern United States, from like southern Nevada, all the way down into parts of Mexico, and even a few species into Central America as well. These guys are adorable. I talked a little bit about them in my video about 5 inexpensive geckos. Hopefully I remember to put the link right here. You can check that out. But these guys are really cool. So like I said, because they occupy all this kind of arid space, their body typology looks very similar to that of a leopard gecko, but they are much smaller. Generally, they only get to about the size 4 to 4.5, maybe 5 inches. There are a few different species and subspecies scattered throughout that range, obviously. They're really, really cool. And as far as taking care of them goes, their care is very similar to that of a leopard gecko, but you wouldn't necessarily need quite as much space because they're like half the size. However, as with pretty much every lizard out there, if you give them the space, they're going to use it. Just make sure that you remember to give them plenty of cover, lots of hiding spaces, good day-night schedule, and good amounts of humid hides for them to get into. These guys can be found pretty regularly, especially in like the spring, early summer, late summer into fall when it's not the hottest of the year. If you kind of go out to the areas where they're normally found, again, like southern Nevada into Arizona, and then if you're in like Mexico going on vacation or something, cruising night, you can see them on the sides of the roads. You can see them outside and around buildings and kind of less urban areas. I don't like rural, I guess you could say, more rural areas. You can see them around being drawn in. Essentially, it looks like they're being drawn in by the lights, but they're being drawn in by the insects that are drawn by the light, or on the roads by the ambient warmth of the asphalt from the day. These guys are really cool. They don't really tolerate handling as much as the leopard geckos, but they're a really cool display species. And once they settle, and especially with that good day-night cycle, you'll see them fairly often, especially in the evenings, fairly active, moving around their enclosure. Another really, really cool thing about these guys is that they have the most adorable defense mechanism. So we all know lizards have different defenses. The blue-tongued skinks have the tongue, the frilled lizards have the giant thing. These guys use a form of mimicry. Because they're so small, what they do is they will hunch over, put their head down, crack open their mouth, or give their little gecko scream, but they will put their big tail over their backs and wiggle it around like this, almost like they're trying to look like a scorpion to try to deter predators like ring-tailed cats, raccoons, and obviously like feral animals like cats and dogs too. These guys are absolutely adorable, and to see that happen, it's really cool. You don't see it quite as much with the captive ones, and it seems to be more of one that happens in more of like the American localities versus like the Mexican and Central American ones, which for the most part we have, but there are some people out there who do work with like Texas and Arizona localities, but it gets a little weird with like state laws when it comes to having native wildlife and things like that. But they are really, really cool little lizards, and one of these days I'm gonna get a pair of them. All right, so this one is the closest I have to like a bit of a cop-out, and this is king snakes. Pretty much every king snake. I have made the argument that these guys are the best pet king snake, although I will say the scarlet king snake gets a bit of a pass because they don't do very well in captivity. And if you want to talk about a whole video about animals, and I can talk about the scarlet king snake that don't do well in captivity, let me know in the comments and I'll do so. But essentially, these guys, I think, are amazing pets, if not the best pet snake. And I do a whole video about that, and you can check out the link right here. Hopefully I remember to do that. But these guys are very varied. There are over 25 species, and again, due to taxonomy and whoever you're arguing with at the time, there's up to 28, plenty of subspecies throughout. They are found essentially coast to coast of the southern United States. And by I don't mean just like the South. I literally mean, oh, and she's musking on me, which is awesome. Thanks, Josephine. I don't handle her nearly as much as I should, but she is very tolerant as far as king snakes go, and I'll talk about that in just a second. They're literally found from as far north as like the Virginias and the Carolinas, all the way over to California, obviously the California king snake. They are as small as, I mean, obviously the scarlet king snake, but there are some that only get into like the 2-footish range, like the gray bands, as up to close to the 6 foots, like Brooks king snakes. And also milk snakes, we're going to throw in there as well. All of the Lamprepeltis, which is the genus that makes up kings and milks, which essentially means shield belly, which hopefully the camera can pick up that they look really, really cool. It's very, very shiny, lots of iridescence, the shield belly of Lamprepeltis. These guys are very tolerant of handling for the most part, although they do have a very big prey response. So as long as I know you're not food, they usually are just fine. Josephine here actually comes from our friends Nature's Educators. She is more than likely an intergrade of a desert king and a Cali king, which are very closely related species and or subspecies, again, depending on who you're having an argument with. These guys are great because they come from North America. They don't need crazy high humidity and heat, so that means that their husbandry can be a little bit more forgiving. They, like I said before, they have great prey drive, so as long as you get an animal that is very well established, because there are some like the gray bands that can have trouble getting started. They are great feeders, they eat consistently, and for the most part, most of them tolerate handling, especially once they're out of the enclosure. Although, as you can see, she did musk me. Let's see if, like that, see, there you go, all of that, she did get on that, but her attitude is just fine. She's really, really great, and I love Josephine. She's such a sweetheart. But I'm not going to talk too much about these guys as much as other ones because everyone knows about king snakes. And again, if you want to know a little bit more detail about their care, the different speciation, things like that, you can check out that king snake video. But I think these guys are amazing pet snakes. And again, maybe the best type of pet reptile. For this last one, and hopefully he's not too mad at me from the musk from Josephine previously, is an animal that I haven't actually had on camera too much. And I'm going to try to keep him fairly still because he's pretty wily. But this is an animal that a lot of people kind of forget about, even though they are everyone's or a lot of people's very first pet reptile, and that is garter snakes. Garter snakes are one of the most common reptiles on the entire continent. They're for sure the most common non-venomous snake, arguably the rattlesnake, because there's a bunch of species of Crotalus or Crotalus, however you want to call it, are very prominent as well. But more than likely, garter snakes are the most common. There are over 35 species, and again, arguments about taxonomy, and their range is from essentially subarctic Canada, so about 2/3 of Canada, all the way down to almost Costa Rica. And actually, I think, yeah, there is one that does make it into Costa Rica a little bit. So this albino checker garter snake isn't native to Colorado, but is native to a good portion of the United States. And specifically in the United States, of all of their different species, they occupy a wide variety of habitats: marshland, wetlands, plains, almost savannas, forests. But usually you'll find them in areas with large water sources of some kind, ponds, streams, lakes, usually with a good amount of underbrush or trees that they can take refuge in nearby those water sources. And the reason why is because these guys are essentially a semi-aquatic reptile. They're very closely related to the water snakes, Nerodia, that's the genus of the water snakes, that are much more aquatic. And because of that, their behavior matches that. They're pretty small, so they don't take up a huge portion while moving around in the water. Their diet is fairly generalist, and which in doing so, they will eat small insects. They will supposedly they eat small insects. I don't know if that's 100% true or not, but they do eat a lot of fish. They will eat crustaceans. They'll eat invertebrates. They'll eat frogs. They'll eat mammals. And actually, it's kind of weird as you look at whatever species it is as a whole, from east to west, their habitation habits and environment seems to be a little bit more aquatic the further west you go, probably because there's less ambient humidity and it's just not quite as wet in general. So you'll probably see in the more eastern species a little bit more mammalian, a little bit more reptilian diets, and the further west you go, a little bit more heavily based in their fish in their diets. These guys are really cool. However, some garter snakes do actually have a slight, very mild rear fang venom. Not all of them have it. There's never been an issue with a human ever being bitten by a garter snake and having any sort of issue. And as a whole, garter snakes are not really keen to bite in general. He's not really bitey, he just likes to move. So I'm basically just trying to keep him fairly still so he looks good for the camera. These guys are really cool. They have a fairly short lifespan as far as snakes go. A lot of them are only in like the 12-ish year range, and a lot of them make it over 20, 30 years old. But that being said, a lot of them might have to do with the diet. A lot of people like garter snakes because you don't have to necessarily entirely feed rodents. You can feed fish and things. But feeding strictly fish diets can lead to neurological issues. So for an animal that's a generalist like a garter snake, changing up their diet is very healthy for them, and I think that could probably lead to a lot of longevity. These guys, they do work very well communally because a lot of snakes, specifically here in North America, will actually hibernate or brumate together in a colony, and they call it a hibernacula, where specifically, like in parts of Ontario and Alberta, Canada, is very famous for having huge amounts of garter snakes, red-sided garter snakes, come out of hibernation all at once, and it scares the daylights out of people who aren't guys like me, who I would absolutely kill to go watch. Sorry, YouTube. Would love to go. I would do a whole lot to go see that coming out in the spring of a whole bunch of garter snakes all coming out at the same time. And other species like rattlesnakes do that as well. They do work very simply, But also, I think it would be really cool, and I think Emily at Snake Discovery does this, has very large, elaborate areas with big water sources, like a big moving pond area with like a moving filter to move that water around, so that way you could provide them an opportunity to eat fish, as well as lots of places for them to communally cohabitate with like one male and like 3 females all the time. It'd be really, really cool. And I think that'd be really fun to do one of these days for myself, but we'll see. I have all sorts of grandiose plans that may or may not ever happen. A final little fun fact about garter snakes is that these guys are ovoviviparous. So generally, what essentially that means is that these guys give live birth, but they carry their into term eggs inside of their bodies. The little snakes hatch out of the eggs, and then they come out of the mom. So with like, pit vipers like rattlesnakes and boa constrictors, they're vivarious just like humans and mammals, except for, the marsupials. Not the marsupials, like platypus and echidna, whose name is escaping me at the moment. They give live birth. They are pregnant with a litter, and they give live babies. And then with most snakes, they are egg layers. They lay their eggs, they lay them out, and then they incubate. These guys incubate the eggs inside and then give them birth. Sorry, I kind of fumbled a little bit there at the end, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this little one. And I'm going to be completely honest with you, because we know a whole lot about reptiles here in the United States, it was really hard for me to come up with 5 animals that either weren't too easy or that did make good pets that aren't just really cool. I'm going to do the next video about the 5 of the different continents, about just really cool reptiles that don't necessarily make the best pets, but are just really cool reptiles that I want to talk about and share with you guys. So hopefully you guys like this one. Hopefully the guys asking for North American reptiles, you got something a little bit different. Maybe you heard about one, gave you an idea for a really cool pet in the future, as well as stay tuned for the just really cool reptiles of North America. And again, if that does really well, I'm going to do the really cool animals of the rest of the continents. So again, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you can, please like and subscribe, hit that bell notification, lets YouTube know that I exist. Go check out my Patreon if you can too. And I know I've talked about this several times, but I am working on the podcast. Hopefully I'll get that up again. It's just been crazy here with the move, and a lot of the people that I have lined up are also doing a lot of crazy things on their own too. But I am working on that, I promise. Hopefully you guys are having a great day, and we will check you next time.